Good morning, friends. It is wonderful to join together with you for these few moments on a Friday morning, or if you're joining me on Friday evening or Saturday or whenever it is, welcome. I'm really glad you're here today. For those of you who may not have met me before, I'm Lorri Landon. I'm on the pastoral staff at First United Methodist Church in Kirksville. And on this beautiful but a little bit chilly spring day, I've been thinking about books. Um, as you can probably guess from my bookshelves behind me, I love books. Always have since I was very young. And fair warning, if we are ever having a conversation in person and you are standing in front of a bookshelf that is not mine, I will probably be trying to read the titles of the books behind you. So if I seem to be looking over your shoulder, that's probably why. Um, Books so often give us a little picture of who somebody is, it seems. Most faith traditions have a shaping set of stories that these days are found in a book. And often we may find that the books that are really resonating with us may change throughout our lives. So I thought I'd just talk a little bit today about books, a couple of things I've been reading, and some of the thoughts that were stirring as I'm thinking about where we are here in April of 2021. One of my most recent things I read was Sue Monk Kidd's most recent book, A Book of Longings. That was one of my birthday presents. Work of fiction written very much in her style, but different from some of the other things. I enjoyed it a lot as that work of fiction. But the one that I'm really coming back to today that I think about is one that I've read, oh gosh, it probably has taken me 6 or 7 months to actually get through this. And that's not usual for me. Often I grab a book and I will devour it. Just sit down for a couple days and pour through it. But this one, it's called A Country Between. And a friend loaned me this book by Stephanie Saldana at some point during the pandemic and COVID. And I found that I could only read it in little pieces at a time. The book, it's a story of the author's life living in Jerusalem and living specifically in a house that was pretty much on the border between the different sides of Jerusalem, between Israel and Palestine. And it's the story of their life in that particular place and time as she becomes pregnant and gives birth to their first child there. And it's fascinating to see the ways that the birth of that child changes their life in this place that is filled with multiple cultures and languages, many at whom are often at war with one another. In one part, she says, "My becoming pregnant assured them that we're not spies because they didn't know spies who were mothers." But there was a part in this book where she says, "Sometimes miracles come to us in people we meet. Sometimes they come to us in orange trees in full fruit in the middle of winter when they're not supposed to be. And sometimes they come to us in books." She says, "I've always believed that a book that arrives in one's hands at a certain moment can be a message from another space and time." And I was fascinated by this as I was reading, as she tells of how her own beliefs and conceptions and comfort in the world are expanded and stretched by this experience and living in such a different place. Sometimes this is a good thing. She discovers how love transcends all sorts of cultures. And the experience of walking through these streets with a stroller, this is a connecting point for people who would usually have nothing to do with one another. And at other times, it's awful. The time that she and her family are walking with that same stroller and they get pelted with stones by they've gone outside of the neighborhood where they're known, and a group of teens starts throwing rocks at them because they obviously look like they don't belong. So this was a lovely book to remind me of how important it is to stretch ourselves, to sometimes be in situations and places that take us beyond what our comfort zone is. But it also made me think of another book, and this is one from my childhood, Anne of Green Gables. I'm guessing some of you have read it, and you automatically have Anne's fiery red hair pop to mind when I mention her name. And the thing that came to mind this week was a phrase that had stood out to me when I first read that set of books. And in the books, Anne Shirley talks about kindred spirits. Those people that we sometimes meet who simply understand us. Maybe not as a whole, often not as a whole actually, but in some way they understand some deep reality about us. And when we are in their presence, at least in that arena of life, we can take a breath. We can kind of rest and relax because we know they understand. And so I'm thinking about that. One of Anne's famous quotes that she says in the book as she's talking to her adopted foster mother, she says, "Kindred spirits are not so scarce as I used to think. It is splendid to find out that there are so many of them in the world." And I'm thinking about that today too, because this past year has been a challenge, I think, for us. And we may be at a point where we're feeling that need for those kindred spirits. And we especially may be discovering that those aren't the same people they used to be. One of the challenges has been this process of the pandemic has revealed different aspects of us, and it's put some of our relationships to the test. I was going to say many of us have people in our lives that we used to get along with pretty well, but those relationships are strained right now for a whole variety of reasons. And so we may be wondering, where are my kindred spirits? Where are those people and places who I don't have to spell it all out? I don't have to try to explain what I'm going through. They get it. They understand. And sometimes that's based on, personality or interest, but so often it's because someone has gone through the same type of experience. Sometimes it's the same type of trauma. And so I'm thinking about those kindred spirits. I had an experience earlier this week where, quite by accident, I stumbled into a setting where there were a couple of folks who just got it. They just understood an aspect of what I'd been dealing with, and it was so lovely in that short time to just be able to take a breath and know that these folks understand that aspect of things. And as I've been thinking of that, I was realizing that sometimes church is that kind of place, but it often does both. And not in a bad way, but because that's what Jesus did. Jesus took this very different group of people. The disciples were not all the same. We sometimes think, oh, they all looked alike, they wore long robes, they did exactly what Jesus said. But they were people from very different backgrounds. They had wildly differing beliefs about how the problems of their time ought to be solved and what role Jesus should play in that. And he brings them together, and they learn from one another. They learn from him. They stretch each other to see the world in slightly different ways, and he takes all of them on a stretch beyond what they could have begun to understand. But also in that, they develop a set of shared experiences that they went through together. And Jesus gives them things to hold on to together. The one that might pop to mind is every week at communion, we talk about how Jesus gathered at the table with the disciples for his last meal together with them. And so that shared experience, as different as those people are in the beginning, I wonder if ever after, if when they would run into one another, there was that shared look of, I remember too. I know what it was like. We shared this truth and experience together. And so in these times, I would just encourage us wherever we're at. I've heard lots of people saying that as we're starting to begin this process of emerging from the pandemic, which is going to feel really awkward for a while, people are going to be at lots of different places. And there may be hesitancy for some. There may be absolute, let's just run, dive, cannonball into the deep end for others. And we may be wondering, do I pick up all the things I had before? Or are some of those no longer fitting who I am now as a result of this experience? Are there places where I need to keep my eyes and heart open for new kindred spirits who can meet me where I am now? To thank those, maybe just in our hearts, depending on how the relationship is, for serving that purpose in the past, but then being open that sometimes it's okay to let relationships go, to let different places and things that we've been involved in go, because seasons do change. They change in our personal lives for lots of different reasons. And as we are going forward into the future, many of us may discover that our priorities have shifted. There may be things that were so important to us before that we've released our grasp on. They're just simply not as important. And new ones are probably either already emerged or in the process of emerging. And so maybe in the midst of all that, just like these books can meet us wherever we're at in those moments, there will be people and places and experiences to meet us there as well. So my prayer for us as we go into these awkward and uncertain weeks and months ahead is that we'll keep our eyes and hearts open for the ways that God is at work continuing to invite us into the future, into what lies ahead, to meet us in those places of peace and grace and love, and to continue to knit us together with those kindred spirits in our lives, most importantly, through Jesus as we draw closer in that journey of faith. So friends, go into these days ahead with an open heart and open spirit, and I pray that there are moments of joy as you have those encounters. Go in peace, and I will see you again next week. Take care.